It began with a smile, the kind that disarmed even the most guarded of hearts. The cheat had a way of weaving charm into every word, every gesture, every calculated silence. When I first crossed paths with him, I was unprepared for the subtle mastery with which he manipulated the world around him. He never rushed, never stumbled, never revealed more than what he wanted you to see. To anyone watching, he appeared flawless, the sort of person who carried certainty in his pocket and generosity in his eyes. I was cautious by nature, yet he managed to find the small cracks in my defenses. He spoke like someone who understood me better than I understood myself, as if he had been studying the pages of my life long before we ever met. At first, I mistook it for genuine connection. I told myself that some people simply fit, like puzzle pieces finding each other across the vastness of the world. But as time passed, I realized he was not fitting into my life. He was bending it, reshaping it, subtly rearranging the pieces until I could no longer distinguish my choices from his influence. Trust was never something I gave freely. It was earned through consistency, through time, through actions that spoke louder than words. But he knew this. He played the long game. He gave just enough to appear dependable, carefully curated gestures that seemed to echo sincerity. He anticipated my doubts and silenced them with small sacrifices, rehearsed moments of vulnerability, and a keen ability to mirror my thoughts. Each time I questioned him, he gave me reasons to feel ashamed of my suspicions, until eventually, I stopped questioning at all. When I finally gave him my trust, I gave it fully, unreservedly, like handing over the keys to a house I had spent years building stone by stone. And that was when the theft began. It wasn't loud or obvious. It never is with cheats. He stole in whispers, in omissions, in cleverly spun half-truths that passed as honesty. My trust became the currency he traded in, and he spent it recklessly. He borrowed my faith to deceive others, used my loyalty to shield his lies, and leaned on my silence to protect his schemes. The betrayal did not come all at once. It unfolded slowly, like the creeping cracks in a mirror that eventually shatters with the slightest touch. I began to notice the inconsistencies, the stories that didn't align, the sudden absences and unexplained shifts in his demeanor. I wanted to believe my instincts were wrong. After all, hadn't I built my faith in him carefully, piece by piece? To admit I had been deceived would mean acknowledging that I had failed to see the truth, that I had allowed myself to be fooled. And so, I clung to denial until the truth refused to be ignored any longer. The day his mask slipped, it wasn't with a grand revelation. It was in a small detail, a careless mistake that exposed the entire web, a lie too fragile to withstand scrutiny. When I confronted him, I saw it, the flicker of panic, the calculation racing behind his eyes, and then the cold decision to double down, to weave another layer of deceit. But by then, the spell had broken. His charm, once intoxicating, now seemed grotesque. Every smile I remembered was a blade. Every word he had spoken echoed hollow in my mind. He had stolen my trust, the most precious thing I had to give, and for a time, it seemed like he had won. He moved on with the same smooth stride, seeking out new marks, weaving new stories, collecting fresh believers. But what cheats never understand is that the theft of trust carries a weight they cannot outrun. The price comes slowly, but it always comes. For him, it came in the form of isolation. The very talent that had once made him untouchable, his ability to deceive, became the wall that trapped him. People began to see through the cracks. The lies piled too high, and the effort to maintain them consumed him. Those who once stood by him drifted away, burned by the same betrayal that had scarred me. One by one, his allies became strangers, and the echoes of his charm fell flat in empty rooms. I did not rejoice in his downfall, but I watched it with the steady calm of someone who has survived the storm. He paid the price not because I sought revenge, but because deceit always demands payment. He had stolen trust, the one treasure that, once lost, cannot be restored by apologies or explanations. And in the end, he found himself with nothing. No trust to lean on, no loyalty to protect him, No one left to believe his carefully spun lies. As for me, I carry the scars of what he took. But scars are not only reminders of pain, they are proof of survival. I learned that trust, though fragile, is not something that can be destroyed by one thief. It is rebuilt, slowly, carefully, in places, and with people who deserve it. And while he became trapped in the ruins of his own making, I stepped forward, cautious but unbroken, knowing that the price he paid was the weight of his own deceit crushing him in the end. The price he paid was not immediate, and that was perhaps the cruelest part of it all. For a while, it seemed as though he had escaped consequence, as cheats often do. He walked away from me as though I were just another chapter in a long book of conquests, another name forgotten in the endless ledger of his deceit. To the world, he still looked untouchable, confident, clever, and invincible. But appearances are like glass, clear enough to let you see through, fragile enough to shatter with the right pressure. In the weeks after our final confrontation, I heard whispers. People who once praised his brilliance began to murmur doubts. A deal he had brokered fell apart in spectacular fashion. A friendship he had leaned on for years crumbled overnight. It was as if the universe itself had begun tugging at the strings of his carefully woven web, unraveling it thread by thread. Cheats can mimic trust, but they cannot sustain it forever. Lies are heavy, and eventually, they drag even the most skilled deceiver down. I remember one night clearly, long after I had walked away from him. A mutual acquaintance reached out to me, voice heavy with shock, to tell me that he had been exposed publicly. Every lie, every manipulation, every theft of loyalty and confidence had spilled into the open under the glare of truth. People who once defended him now turned against him. The same charm that had made him magnetic became a grotesque reminder of how easily they had all been fooled. He tried, of course, to spin another story, to weave another excuse, but this time, no one believed him. That was his real punishment, not the loss of wealth or status, but the collapse of the illusion he had lived behind for so long. He had built his life like a house of mirrors, full of reflections designed to confuse and impress. And in the end, he became lost inside it, unable to distinguish between who he truly was and who he pretended to be. Isolation became his shadow. The louder he tried to insist on his innocence, the quieter the world around him grew. He had stolen trust so many times that, finally, no one had any left to give him. For me, the healing was slow, but steady. At first, I carried anger, like a fire that burned behind my ribs, threatening to consume me. But anger is a strange companion. It can protect you for a while, but it cannot stay forever. Eventually, I set it down and picked up something far heavier, but more necessary, the task of rebuilding myself. I learned to look more carefully at people, to weigh their actions against their words, to listen not only to what they said, but to what they avoided saying. I will never forget how he stole my trust, but I no longer see it as something entirely lost. Trust, I discovered, can be reclaimed not from him, not from those like him, but from the people who prove themselves worthy of it. My scars do not make me weaker. They make me wiser, more deliberate, less likely to mistake charm for character. And so, in the end, while he paid the price in loneliness, ruin, and the slow collapse of his false empire, I paid mine in lessons learned, in nights spent questioning myself, in the ache of betrayal that lingered long after he was gone. But unlike him, my price was not permanent. I grew from it. I endured. He remains, somewhere out there, a man who once thought himself clever enough to steal what cannot truly be stolen. But the truth is this: trust, once broken, may wound the giver, but it destroys the thief. He will carry that ruin forever. And I will carry the knowledge that I survived him, while he could not survive himself. The strange thing about people like him is that they believe they are immune to consequences. They think deception is a game, that people are pieces to be moved and discarded. When he stole my trust, I was only one of many. I later came to realize he had left behind a trail of others, friends, lovers, colleagues, all of them carrying the same wound, the same disbelief that they had been so thoroughly fooled. He was clever enough to keep us separated, to make each of us think our pain was unique, that our stories of betrayal would never be believed. But lies have a way of gathering, like storm clouds that eventually converge into something too heavy to contain. It started small. A rumor in one corner of the city, a quiet warning whispered in another. People began to share their stories. One by one, the masks he wore were described in detail by those who had once fallen for them. His lies, once scattered, began to connect like pieces of a puzzle until a picture emerged, a picture of a man who had stolen from everyone, not money or possessions, but something more valuable, their faith. He tried to fight back, of course. Cheats always do. He blamed others, painted himself as the victim, told tales of jealousy and betrayal that cast him as the misunderstood hero. But the problem with stealing trust is that once you are exposed, every word you speak becomes suspect. No matter how loudly he insisted, people had stopped listening. His words were hollow, stripped of their power. And then came the unraveling. Opportunities dried up. Invitations ceased. Doors that had once opened for him slammed shut. He found himself wandering among people who recognized his face, but no longer welcomed it. He had built his life on borrowed trust, and when that credit finally ran out, he discovered he had nothing left to stand on. I heard stories of his decline from a distance. Some said he turned bitter, snapping at those few who still lingered near him. Others said he retreated, preferring the shadows to the humiliation of being seen. Either way, his charm, once so dangerous, became useless in a world that had already marked him for what he truly was. As for me, I carried on. There were nights when the memory of his betrayal clawed at me, nights when I replayed our conversations, searching for the moment I should have seen through him. But I also realized that trust, when stolen, does not stay with the thief. It is poisoned, and it turns to ash in their hands. He had not taken my ability to trust forever. He had only revealed how fragile it could be and how strong I could become after it was broken. The price he paid was not dramatic, not like the downfall of a villain in a tale of justice and revenge. No, his punishment was slower, quieter, more suffocating. It was the slow erosion of his power, the silence that greeted his once celebrated voice, the way people looked at him and saw not brilliance, but emptiness. That is the true cost of betrayal. It leaves you alone in a world where no one dares to believe in you anymore. And so, the story of the cheat who stole my trust does not end with fire or fury. It ends with silence. My life continued, scarred but still moving forward, while his life collapsed under the weight of his own lies. In the end, he paid the price not in a single moment of retribution, but in the slow, inevitable collapse of everything he once believed made him powerful. He thought he had stolen something from me that could never be restored. But he was wrong. What he took was never truly his to keep, and the ruin it left behind was not mine to carry. It was his. Always his.